Welcome to the Growth Shift. I'm David Zilstra. Here's what I've learned after years in business. Every leader who's built something meaningful has a story, but the moment they had to shift, when failure forced innovation, when change became opportunity, when they chose growth over comfort. On this show, we dive into those pivotal moments, the setbacks that became breakthroughs, the strategic shifts that accelerated growth, and the frameworks that turn obstacles into opportunities. Because here's the truth. In a world where change is the only constant, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who've learned to shift strategically through it. So whether you're facing your own pivot point or just want to learn from someone who's been there, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Valentix. At Valentix, we help B2B coaches and consultants who are struggling with generating consistent, high-quality leads, automating their client onboarding processes, and scaling their operations without simply adding more hours or more headcount. Most of the time, our clients come to us frustrated because they're bogged down in manual tasks and feel like they're missing out on the power of modern technology. But with the right strategy and AI-powered solutions, they're able to streamline their workflows, attract better opportunities, and achieve sustainable growth. If that sounds like you or someone you know, learn more at valentix.io. Now let's dive into today's episode. Today on the Growth Shift, we are incredibly privileged to host Shenandoah Chefalo, a truly inspiring leader and the founder of Chefalo Consulting. Shenandoah's personal story is one of remarkable resilience and transformation, having navigated a youth foster care and homelessness to become a leading expert in organizational culture shifting. She's a published author whose work focuses on embedding the neuroscience of trauma into organizational practices, making workplace more human-focused and less task-driven. Shenandoah is also deeply engaged with modern challenges, including the ethical implications of AI and the critical need for human connection in a rapidly changing world. Her insights into fostering belonging, mental wellness, and strategic adaptation within large organizations are invaluable. Shenandoah, welcome to the Growth Shift.
David, so excited to be here with you today.
Oh, excited to have you on the show. Now, you have quite a remarkable background and journey that led to where it is you are today. Could you share with us how your background and experiences ultimately led you to dedicate your work to transforming organizations and fostering more human-centered environments?
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much, right? Because when you're a kid and people say, what are you going to be when you grow up? I don't think my job hits the list, right? I'm not a fireman. I'm not like all these jobs that we think about. But what really happened is that youth spent unhoused for most of my youth, went into foster care at the age of 13, aged out halfway through my senior year of high school. All of those pieces made me really want to keep it a secret, right? So all the myths that go along with being in foster care, no matter where you are around the world, but all of that trauma as well. I grew up in a time where it was fake it till you make it. And I think we might just be coming out of that phase in the business world, right? Where it's don't let people in too much and that you come to work and sort of keep that information to yourself. And I bought into that wholeheartedly with just boots on the ground, do your job, get as much done as you can, try to climb that corporate ladder. And it was really through the clients I was working with in our law office that became unraveled for me. And not intentionally unraveled, but in trying to figure out how could we help our clients better, which is what every organization's trying to do, I had to come face to face with the stuff I was pushing down or that I thought I was pushing down. And it was really through a combination of timing and our clients in general saying, you can't really make the shifts you want if you're not honest about where you are in this work. And so I had some good timing around trauma-informed neurobiology, where we were in the science of that, and then realized we didn't have this people crisis or the constant crisis. It was our operating systems. It was the way that we were doing it. So instead of chasing buy-in, right, which is like a big thing I hear all the time, we started asking what happens if we just reduce harm up front. And so we decided to change the way that we worked. We decided to not just think about impacts on clients, but also impacts on staff that we were trying to do. And I did that in the midst of trying to figure out what does that mean for me personally, as well as what does it mean for us as an organization.
Wow. So it sounds like there's almost a journey of overcoming limiting beliefs or, past experiences, we could say, as part of your journey. And before we jump into talking about Chefalo Consulting and, really the impact that you're having, I'd love to take a step back to perhaps give the audience maybe a little bit of insight and help there even. I mean, foster children, growing up in that system, right, you're really dependent on the foster parents that you are placed with. And that's a pretty mixed bag at times. I grew up with a number of foster or children in foster care myself. And I know that, foster children face some pretty unique challenges and situations. And for entrepreneurs and business owners, one of the biggest challenges they face being self-limiting beliefs or beliefs passed on down to them through the experiences that they inherited growing up. I mean, those are some pretty big challenges to overcome.
Yeah.
With your experience going through the foster care system and, encountering those unique challenges within it, was there anything specific that you would say, even setbacks or specific challenges that you had in learning to deal with those, maybe even put you further ahead of people who perhaps grew up in a normal, usual environment?
Well, it's yes and, as always is the case, right, David? So there's things still, even as this fully formed adult who's overcome a lot, where I still go, that's the past creeping back, right? And I think it's that self-awareness of like, here we are. Those things are so ingrained from early childhood that they will creep up in the most unexpected ways, even today. And I feel like I've done a lot of personal work. But there's still things, and I think self-doubt for sure falls in that category, where I sometimes say to myself when I'm having a bad moment, oh gosh, if those people would have been my parents, where would I be in the world right now, right? Like a little bit of jealousy that sometimes creeps in because I feel like the hurdles, the ladders I've climbed have been, maybe more than others and not as many as others at the same time. So there's that piece. But I think I have an innate ability to know the sun will rise tomorrow because of the experiences that I've had. I mean, I have been so depressed in my life, right? I've had suicidal ideation. I talk about it pretty openly that when I made my way to college, although it took me 8 years to graduate from college, my first 90 days, I had 3 suicide attempts. Wow. And I had that, as I look back now, because I was completely disconnected from other people. There was no safety net, right? So if you think about a typical college or university experience where, I'm going to come home on weekends for holidays or to see, to still do family traditions and birthdays or even your laundry. For kids in care, that's not an option. There is no secondary safety net or place to go. And that disconnection can make you feel alone in the world. And I've seen that at its very deep depths. And I think that's why this pivot to the work now is, I know everything is relationships. So we can distract ourselves with buy-in, with numbers, quarterly earnings. We can talk about all of that, but the solution underneath all of it is relationships and connections. And I think that piece has given me an advantage that when you're talking about growing your company, are you going to do that at the cost of relationships?
Relationships within your organization, not just to the people that you might want to work with.
Yeah, it's yes and, right? Because if you think of the growth of anything where you might start off as a small retail store, for example, let's just use something, right? You're selling a product and you might know your customers very well. But if you begin to grow and you have 3 stores and 12 stores and 20 stores, do you still know your customers in the same way? Do you still have the same kind of relationships? And the same is true for staff. If you're a small business, it's super easy to have a relationship with 10 employees or even 50 employees. What happens when you have 11,000 employees?
That scales pretty quickly. You probably lose touch in terms of relationships pretty quickly as well.
And I think that's what we miss about culture and the change. And I think that's the experience of growing up in the fashion that I did, is how valuable relationships are and connections are with each other.
So you take a trauma-informed approach to organizational growth and, with a focus on relationships as well. Can you put that into some everyday terms for us? What is it that you actually do with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? Because I think we can sometimes think about culture as such an abstract piece of this work that we did. But really, whether we're intentional or unintentional, we're building and working on our culture every single day. And so what I really try to do is help clients and systems be intentional about the culture that they're choosing instead of unintentional about it. And so it's this idea of how do we stop chasing buy-in and start reducing harm? And how do we redesign things like onboarding and feedback and debriefs so that people matter more than task? Now, that can be really hard for executives and leaders to really buy into because they're like, well, listen, bottom lines is what matters. And we need people producing, and we need to produce more and more efficiently, oftentimes with less resources. But what we know and what the research suggests is when people are bought into a culture, they'll actually produce beyond even what they thought was possible. And we see this when we look at sports and we look at championship teams, right? Is that, listen, most professional sports teams, whatever sport you're looking at, are capable. They have the skills, they have they have everything that they need. But how do you get to that championship mindset? And it's usually about the relationships and about the desire to do more for each other. And so it's really trying to take that and understand that the relationships we have together, the culture, that's when you usually hear like, oh, the culture at that organization is bad or that team is bad, right? We need a culture change. We need a coaching change so that the culture will change. But it's really about everybody in the organization, from the leaders to frontline staff and everyone in between, buying into the fact that when we care about each other, we can do more, faster, further, stronger, and have typically a better impact on our customers or our end users.
Sounds like almost what you're doing is, you're helping organizations create a sense of belonging and value and purpose within their teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Because without that, then this just becomes a place I clock into. And if you don't care about me, then I only care about the bare minimum, right? This is when we get into conversations around quiet quitting, is I'm just here to do a task because that's what you require of me versus I really care about what this task means to the rest of the organization.
So something that I'm curious about, and I'm sure some of the audience as well, is when you say you work at, with an approach of reducing harm, what does that mean? I mean, can you give us an example of perhaps how it is you came in and worked with a client to do something like this?
Yeah. So, you might begin thinking about KPIs, right? Or all of these things that matter. And so what we start saying is, how does safety become a process and not just a pep talk, but how do we do these small weekly practices that anyone in the organization can do, knowing that culture isn't what you say, but it's actually how do we handle mistakes and do repair work? Because here's the truth. We're humans. We're going to screw up. I mean, we said it before we started the podcast, right, David? Hey, it's why we record. If we screw up, we'll fix it. We know that going into this recording. But what happens with work? Most of us are operating from such a place of fear at work because if I screw up, will I be written up? Will I be fired? Will I lose trust? Will I lose, all safety at work if I make this mistake? Well, what if we kind of switched that on its head and said, we know we're going to make mistakes. We're human. Now we'll get into the AI piece in a bit, but we're still human beings. Mistakes are going to happen. But what if we just had an agreement? This is how we're going to fix it, even when we screw up before the screw up happens, right? So I know, David, if I say something wrong, you're going to fix it in editing post. So I need to worry less about that and being perfect in this recording. So day to day, it's about doing that. So here's like ideas or things that it might look like. Let's say we're going to do something like a 10-minute debrief. I call it the facts, feelings, findings, future, right? It's this idea that we do safety first and performance next. So something's messed up. Well, what's the facts around the mess up? What's our feelings around the mess up? Which is usually the thing that derails any organization because we don't want to talk about feelings at work. So while we say we want emotional intelligence, this idea of talking about emotions somehow feels where it doesn't belong in the workforce. So what's the facts? What's our feelings? What's our findings? What do we know based on what's happened? Sometimes screwing up can lead us to an even better place because we find something we wouldn't have found before. And what's the future? So given everything that we know, what will we do next? And what will we do in the future to avoid it the next time? It's just a simple piece of slowing down and debriefing that instead of just saying, you screwed up, here's your write-up, I'll fix it myself. I'm not going to tell you how or why or what's happened. And we move forward where people begin to feel siloed and left out. Instead of like, let's just talk about it. The sooner we know about it, we can fix it, we can create safety, and safety will create a better culture for everybody.
Sounds like it's almost a more human and an emotional approach to what many people call a open door policy, right? But the open door policy it's still kind of cloudy or gray.
Yes.
Like if I can go into an open door and I can say something, but how am I going to feel? Are they going to actually come meet me where I'm at and help me through that? Because I've been in plenty of companies that have pretty good cultures and open door policies, but that doesn't really make anyone feel better about going to that open door necessarily.
Well, and especially like the open door for who, right? Because we have to think about this not just as a top down or a bottom up, but really an inside out. That when we talk about human-centered organizations, it's not that people's roles change. A CEO is still going to have the roles of a CEO, but what if we flatten the hierarchy and we start to realize that frontline staff, middle management, and executive staff are all having similar experiences. We might all stub our toe in the morning that causes us to react in that first meeting of the day, right? What if we just gave everybody the same sort of autonomy and humanness in an organization to flatten it? So in the open door policy, it's like, yeah, I have an open door where my staff can come to me, but do you also go to your staff, right? Because it's not just these one-way streets, it's two-way streets. It's like, in order to feel safe with you, you have to feel safe with me. And I'm in lots of organizations where leaders aren't sure they feel safe with their staff, but they want their staff to feel safe with them. And so we have to tackle that it's about that recovery and relationship, that leaders have to be okay with admitting when they're wrong, which is very difficult for leaders and people in power to have to say, I screwed up, I wasn't clear, I got this wrong, I gave you the wrong instructions that led us down the wrong path. That's a really hard thing to happen in many organizations. And so being slow and deliberate, open door for what? Can I really come in here and feel like I can say to you, hey, I screwed up and I know what your response is going to be? Or if I come in and say I screwed up, might the response be one of 50 different things? And if some of those might do harm to me, it's not worth me coming in and telling you at the risk of that harm. So that's what we mean when we say, how do we reduce harm? Is it's happening in big ways and small ways all the time. And how could we make humans first, right? Is the human more important than the task?
I love the analogy of it being a two-way street, right? It's not one road going in one direction. Yeah. Could you perhaps share a story about a specific client engagement where, this approach led to a more profound cultural shift or just significant improvement in the team culture?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I can think of lots and lots and lots of people who have seen these kinds of changes that we're talking about, right, David? So you can think about all of those pieces and parts. It's actually the really small things that I always draw my attention to. Now, I'm saying that because I work in a school district where we've seen changes such as student suicidal ideation drop by significant numbers. I've seen staff turnover drop by significant numbers. And those are important and valuable. But I think the stories that stick with me are the ones where leaders say, I started doing check-ins, a 5-minute check-in, right? How are you feeling? What's your goal for our time? Who's your support person today? And I've watched an entire room breathe a sigh of relief, right? This idea of like, it's actually those small moments that can cause the biggest shifts of like, they don't do things the way other people do things here. And I think for me, that becomes more important than the data outputs. Now, I know many leaders probably listening to this are really concerned about data outputs. I'm concerned about measuring that happiness of your staff. And what the research, of course, tells us is that it's about relationships and results. Do the things I do in this organization matter? And do I like the people in which I do them with? And so measuring that to me has become the piece. So I think back often to leaders who have said to me, Shen, we've gone from everything 24/7 Slack, urgent everything to, hey, what do you need? This has to be done soon. Who needs to be on board? How do we shift power? And moving away from that urgent culture to the human culture. And so I think it's those pieces that make me think about the really positive thing where things like burnout don't become the badge of honor, right? Burnout is not what we're aiming for. Instead, we're aiming for a sense of accomplishment in a time frame that's feasible.
Seems like, helping foster trust within organizations between teams is what has a really big impact.
Yeah, because I got to know you have my back, not on the easy day, right? I need to know you have my back when maybe a partner has gotten sick unexpectedly or someone in my family has died unexpectedly. And we also have a deadline that's this week. What really is most important? It's not in those everyday average weeks where, hey, we're all going through the motions and everything's on track. It's in those moments where chaos ensues, where something goes really badly with a client or a customer. Do we have each other's backs, right? Or something is going wrong personally for one of our staff members. But listen, got to hold everyone to the same accountability. And you didn't meet your metrics this week or this month or this quarter, and we don't care what's going on outside of this. It's what matters. I talk to a lot of leaders, both as clients and on my podcast, and I'm always kind of amazed when something bad really happens. Here's an example just from this week. Layoffs are happening, right? Lots of budgets being cut everywhere. I'm so amazed to listen how that happens. It's amazing to me to think like, most people aren't controlling budgets. I work a lot in the public sector realm where like budgets are dictated by Congress and by governments. A leader isn't choosing their budget necessarily, right? And they have to do layoffs. Well, staff knows layoffs are coming. They listen to the same evening news the rest of us listen to. But I'm always surprised when it's done in such a cold way. An email that says your job's being eliminated with no context of what that means, or your job is shifting, as sometimes happens in the public sector. You're no longer going to be in this department, but moving to that department. Instead of just a call, a one-on-one, the compassion of what that might mean for somebody, even if the job is fully eliminated, how it sometimes says, well, HR says, and we don't want to open ourselves up to a lawsuit and all of these pieces. Well, I can understand that, but can't we have a yes and? Doesn't the human still matter as well as the task that you have to accomplish? And what's the toll, not just for the person you might be firing or let go, but the person you're asking to do those mass firings and letting go? And it seems that we don't want to stop and pause and appreciate and hold space sometimes about humans. We love to say humans go first, but very often we're putting the task in front of the person that is impacted by the task.
It sounds like you take a very impactful approach to, working within organizations to really help foster that human-centric approach, which not only strengthens the organizations, but also their growth and their results as a result. Shenandoah, we're increasingly busy market and saturated times with coaches and consultants all across the board.
Yeah.
And with such an unfortunately unique approach that you take, unfortunate because more people should be doing this, how do you go about securing clients who might not immediately notice the value and impact of what you do just because it's not so common?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting piece, and clients kind of come in a lot of ways. One way is things are really bad, right? Mm-hmm. So I get a lot of clients who call me when there's been a huge HR complaint, or maybe it's even escalated to some kind of investigation of things are really bad here. And it's really interesting, even in those really bad circumstances, how many times leaders will say, I think we might just have a problem with a person or a group of people, but I don't really think this is widespread. And it doesn't take long to realize it's widespread, right? So there does seem to be some disconnect for a lot of leaders about what the true nature of their culture is, especially in large systems, because perhaps people are telling you what you want to hear, and that plays a really big role. So that's one way. But the other way is that I also get contacted by leaders who know their staff are tired. They know their staff's exhausted and they don't know what to do. They've tried the pizza party. They've tried extending benefits, even in places where we've tried to give better pay, right? Or maybe we're paying at the high end of what market rates are, but they're still seeing pure exhaustion. So they know that there's something in their culture that's not right, and they want to go about changing it. And this often happens because of things happening in the real world. COVID is a prime example. A lot of leaders had a realization in COVID that their culture might not have been where they thought it was. And they saw lots of disengagement. And so many leaders got very excited about working on culture during COVID and even coming post-COVID. But now we've entered back into, hey, we're back at it, right? Everyone called the office. And so there seems to be this disconnect with culture. But I think we're getting back into another realm as we look at the geopolitical world, how the world is decreasing in size, the role of AI, where many leaders are saying, okay, we have to move beyond checklisting wellness in our organization. Pizza parties, bowling days, even days off aren't getting it done. How do we actually begin changing our culture that we care about our staff, and that when we care about our staff, we'll actually get more work done?
So, with these things considered and, how it is you're coming and having an impact, and the fact that more people are looking for consulting of this sort, what's coming for Chefalo Consulting? What are your plans for growth? What are you working on internally?
Yeah, I'm working on how do we do more leadership development. I think we're coming to an age where we can't just do what we've always done, that we have more generations in the workforce than ever before. And our old ways of working aren't working in a modern workforce. And so I think people need new skills. There is a need for a tune-up, as I say, always. But I've been thinking about it a lot with my own. What are the things from my own leadership and my own past that maybe served me to this point, but are no longer serving me in a modern workplace, working with people who might be 20 or 30 years younger than me, in a place in which we have remote work and hybrid work and all of these different variables coming in. And so I think what's next for us is, how can we serve more people at their pace? So how can we also get away from in-person, on the ground, which means me sitting on a plane coming to see you? And how can we deliver better training virtually in both live and self-paced ways so people can go at their own pace and on their own budget?
I'm hearing a lot of things here about, the virtual world, about being able to work with clients not in person. Where does AI come into play to support these goals?
Yeah, AI is a really interesting thing for me sitting in my space and place in the world, right? And so AI, for me, is a coworker on the admin load. It serves a ton of that, but it's also not a replacement for relational leadership. And so I think that balance is a really, really important one, not just for myself, but for people in general. It's like, yep, it's definitely a coworker, and it's a coworker whom I very much like, but it can't replace relationships. I know some people will disagree with that, David, but
I mean, I suppose it depends on the type of relationship. If it's a
yeah,
transactional relationship and you're going to somebody to buy a
yeah,
pair of shoes and, you just want to be able to find those shoes faster, that's one thing, right? But beyond that, relationships are probably the most important aspect of business, I would say. Even if you're buying a pair of shoes, they can be very important.
yeah.
Do you have any, it sounds like you're very bullish on AI, of course. You're using it in a lot of ways. It's almost like an employee to you, and you're definitely leveraging it. So it sounds like, you think pretty positively about it. I'm kind of curious as well from like a culture and from a value perspective when it comes to within organizations. A lot of people also have concerns about AI displacing and disrupting employment and all of these things as well. Do you have any concerns about how it might impact organizations if not approached with the right perspective?
Yeah, listen, AI needs seatbelts, right? Like this is kind of the thing that I find myself saying. I don't know all the seatbelts it needs just yet. I think I'm just going to say there's more I don't know than I do know. But one of the things that's super important to me as I think about AI and as seatbelts is if it touches dignity, then a human goes first, right? It's one thing for me to say, hey, can you spell check this document? Can you make this sound a little more professional? I get all of that with AI. But when it comes to, hey, can you perform surgery on this human? Can you have this hard conversation? To me, when dignity becomes involved, then a human goes first. I don't know what that means in all of the context for all the people listening, but I do know there's a place for AI. I don't see a world in where we go back on AI at this point, but I am worried about guardrails, consent, confidentiality, a human review on people decisions, right? If I think about foster care, if I think about the judicial system here in the US, if I think about public health, public schools, these are a lot of systems that I work in. If it's a people decision, I think it needs people reviewing it. Not that maybe AI didn't give you the ideas or the thoughts, but before you implement those ideas or thoughts, I think we better have a bias check of at least a couple of humans before we implement it.
Mm-hmm. With these things in mind, then maybe some words to our audience of executives and leaders. Considering your focus on moving organizations from a task-focused mentality to a more human-focused one, what would you say is one critical principle or practice you believe leaders need to uphold when starting to integrate AI into their companies, considering culture, to make sure that they're continuing to serve and focus the human element rather than dehumanizing the workplace?
Yeah, I think there's a fine line, and again, I think we're going to make some mistakes before we get it right. But AI can't save you from meetings that just need to be canceled anyway. I think we have lived coming out of the 90s into the 2000s. There was this idea that the more things are on my calendar, the more important I am. And I think for sure, right? AI can help you get even more packed in on your calendar and get more productive and move things around. And right, I've watched people talking about calendars on LinkedIn and places about like, oh my gosh, AI saved me 14 steps because now I go from this to this, right? Like that's saving me 12 minutes a day or whatever it is because my meetings are now all on the second floor, then the third floor, instead of having to go from the second floor to the third floor to the sixth floor. Interesting. What about all the people you're now not seeing because of that moving around, right? So there is some balance about efficiency and productivity and people. The one thing that I say just about the workplace that's changed since I've been in it is once upon a time we were all watching the same 3 television shows on TV because we had like 3 channels. Even when cable came in, we had like 12 channels, right? So, but we were all watching the same thing on television. Well, when I'd come to work, David, I'd say, hey, what did you think of the show last night? And there's a good chance we're watching the same thing at the same time, and we saw it at exactly the same moment. all the efficiency of streaming, right, is that I have no idea what you're watching on TV, David. And even if we have sometime in our past watched the same show or we're currently watching the same show, what episode are you on? What episode am I on? And all of a sudden, this efficiency that we see actually begins eroding away our relationships. Because now, even those very small things we no longer have the ability to talk about or to connect on. And it seems so small. But it's the thing that I've been saying. Sometimes technology gives us so much, but it's also eroding relationships in ways that we might not have even noticed. So I used to have to go to the grocery store and I would meet people in my community. And likely, if I grocery shopped at the same time every week, I would see the same people. And it becomes its own kind of community. Now you get them delivered to your front porch. And you don't even see the people. You likely don't even see your delivery driver. Again, it's these relationships that become eroded. And it's why I think the relationships at work are becoming more and more important to everybody, because those other relationships are starting to fade away. And so I think the balance of AI is it doing something that's making you more efficient at the cost of your relationships? And that's a question that I find myself asking quite a bit.
Very insightful. Shenandoah, your dedication to transforming organizational culture and your insights into human resilience, very powerful. To wrap things up, what's the single most important piece of advice that you'd offer to our audience of entrepreneurs who are striving to build organizations that are not only profitable, but also deeply human-centered and resilient in the face of constant change?
So a couple of things pop into my mind when I hear you say that, David. And one is we audit budgets all the time. When will we audit stress and compassion? And what's the cost that's causing our company? So as you're thinking about the bottom line, I just make a counter argument that one of the things costing us that doesn't usually show up is stress and compassion fatigue. It's not going to come up on the P&L, right? But it's there in sneaky ways. It's there in sick day call outs. It's there in retention and turnover. It's there in a lot of ways, but it doesn't show up as a cost reduction line usually. And I think it's actually costing us much more than people want to give it credit for. The other piece is leadership is a nervous system, and that's not just a roadmap. So really understanding that piece is important as well.
Yeah, these things may not show up directly on the P&L, but they're definitely going to move and impact the P&L in one direction or another. Shenandoah, thank you so much for joining us on The Growth Shift today. For any of our audience who might like to take a deeper look at what it is you're doing and learn a little bit more how they can continue taking or start taking a human-centric approach, what would be the best way to find you or connect with you?
Love that question, David. Thanks so much. It's great being Shenandoah Chefalo because I'm the only one on the planet. So I always say, if you can kind of spell it, you can kind of find me. But chefaloconsulting.com, reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're happy to get in touch and stay in contact with folks.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap on another episode of The Growth Shift. If this conversation sparked something for you, whether it's a new perspective on failure, a strategy you want to try, or just the reminder that every setback can become a setup for something bigger, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid change. They're the ones who shift strategically through it. If you're ready to build the systems that help you grow without the chaos, head over to valentix.io. We help businesses like yours scale smarter, not harder. I'm David Zylstra, and I'll see you in the next shift.